one nation, under God, indivisible, with
Liberty, justice for all.
for all. Okay, pursuant to section 31 of the public laws of New Jersey, this is a state record.
Liberty, justice for all.
Okay, everyone was a little delayed. Okay, pursuant to section 5, chapter 231 of the public laws of New Jersey, this state for the record that adequate notice of this meeting has been provided to the public by posting and maintaining the annual notice of regular meetings on the bulletin board of the municipal building, by mailing the annual notice of regular meetings for 2022, the news record and Star Ledger in December 2021, and by filing said notice in the office of the township clerk.
Ms. Adams.
Here.
Ms. Cripe.
Here.
Mr. DeLuca.
Here.
Mr. McGehee.
Here.
Mayor Daffis.
Here.
Whereas Chapter 231, Public Laws of 1975, commonly known as the Open Public Meetings Act, requires that all meetings of public bodies be open to the public. And whereas Section 7A provides that the governing body has the discretion to permit, prohibit, or regulate the active participation of the public at any meeting. And whereas desire the governing body to comply with the provision of this act, same time to conduct its business in an orderly and expeditious manner, now therefore be resolved by the Township Committee. Township of Maplewood does hereby prohibit, as set forth in the formal agenda, active participation in deliberations of the governing body by the public, except as otherwise described by law, does limit the public to the observation of the actions and discussions of the governing body at all of its regular and special meetings.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Adams.
Yes.
Ms. Cripe.
Yes.
Mr. DeLuca.
Yes.
Mr. McGehee.
Yes.
Mayor Daffis.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Fritzen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to yet another budget workshop of Maplewood's 2022 municipal budget. As we had mentioned in previous recent public meetings, we are gathering here this evening in a special meeting like this so that we can present an amendment to our budget. We need to amend our budget, make a few adjustments here and there. We'll be discussing and presenting those this evening in order to be able to adopt our budget, which is on track to be adopted once and for all on the 6th of September, our first TC meeting in September in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks or so. All I'm going to say, I'm going to allow our township administrator to present some more details about the necessary adjustments and changes that need to be made. And of course, our CFO is with us, CFO Koloje. We'll have the opportunity to provide some additional details. Essentially, we're pleased that as we gather this evening to have a discussion, present this to the public, we're not actually engaging in a workshop in the traditional sense, in that there are going to be no necessary operational cuts to our budget, as we had already put it together earlier this year. Also, we're pleased to report that we're not dipping into fund balance. So that's really important because we need to have money for a rainy day. And we're also pleased to report that there's going to be no change by virtue of these amendments to the tax rate. So those are three very important things at the outset that we need to keep in mind and state for the public record. But there are adjustments that needed to be made, shifting around line items, providing more documentation to the state about certain things that we declared as revenue. And I'm going to ask Township Administrator Gimes to provide some of those details, and then turn it over to CFO Koloje to provide his remarks and further details. Mr. Gimes.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to pull up a copy of the budget proposed resolution for you all to see. I know you have it already, but just for the sake of the public, I know this is small for the small font for those in the public. So assuming this gets, in the event this gets passed, it will be a public record, and I'd be happy to send it to anybody in advance of the meeting tomorrow evening as well. So just feel free to shoot me an email or give us a call at Town Hall if you'd like a copy of this. So This two-page document of budget amendments is largely issues of statutory compliance. And as the mayor said, that there are no changes to fund balance, operational cuts or the tax levy. Going down to the columns on the right, you'll see several areas that say regulatory compliance, no change to budget. As it relates to the revenues, a lot of that was a result of the numbers that were presented in the introduced budget after state review were modified upon completion of the annual financial statement. The adjustments to several items were up a few dollars in some items and down a few dollars in other items, but they all netted out to zero, which is why there was no change to the budget, even though there were several revenue line items that were changed. You're also going to see that grants were collected in 2021, offsetting appropriations. And the reason for those changes is, I would say, a new policy by the state or the DLGS. They're looking to see that money collected in grants in a prior year are immediately run through the budget in the subsequent year. So if you go through the 2 pages, you'll see several grants listed like that. These cover both appropriations and revenues because, as you may know, as I'm sure you know, when you get a grant as a revenue, there's an offsetting appropriation to that as well. On appropriations, you're going to see changes to line items such as police salary and wages, where we're proposing, which I'll get to in a moment, the use of American Rescue Plan money to offset some of that as a result of the inability to use some of the insurance money that we had submitted as potential revenue. When we did submit that to the state, there was a very detailed document from our underwriters that listed and itemized all the proposed items that we were seeking reimbursement for and those that we were definitely going to get. Unfortunately, we were hoping when we submitted that in anticipation of this question, that revenue would have come in by the time, we got the state comments back. We got these state comments back, I want to say the first week of August. Unfortunately, that was not the case. And that is simply not a result of anybody on the township side. I've been vigilant in contacting our insurance folks 3, 4, 5 times a week to see when these are going to come. I do know that there were 2 meetings last week on these funds, and we were expecting a favorable disposition on those. So I have my eye out any day. But nonetheless, that's going to be irrelevant. And that when that money comes in, we're just going to use that for various things to offset, any of the IDA-related charges or the deferred charges that we have, with consultations from the auditor on how we can appropriately use that. So that covers really, as you'll see, most of the significant changes to the appropriations and revenues. They're regulatory compliance issues that don't result in any net negative or positive increase or deficit to the budget. The mayor did mention that there are some significant changes that we're going to make to put our budget in compliance and to be ready to be adopted. Before I get into those, I'll tell you that I am aware that there have been some conversations today between our budget consultants and the finance office with the state. All the information has been provided to them, and we're feeling pretty comfortable that within a matter of 2 or 3 days, we're going to get final disposition on that as well. But the changes that were made to, put this budget, on the path to adoption at our next regular meeting is a reduction in bond principal, debt service appropriation to align with the current amortization schedule established by last year's bond refunding and bond issue. The use of the American Rescue Plan money reclassified as revenue, which replaces, as I mentioned, the insurance funds. They had to be removed, obviously, based on everything I just said. And finally, number 3, this is basically the big 3, the reduction of the IDA emergency appropriation. We had initially anticipated paying it off in 3 years. We can now have the ability to pay it off in 5 years. So reducing that is a reduction in a line item for the 2022 budget. All of these, anything you do, in a budget year to year is going to have impact on your future year's budget, and we're aware of that. As we've mentioned previously several times, we do know that, prior to all of this occurring, that there was a light at the end of our proverbial tunnel simply because we have a lot of debt service coming off the books next year. So, anything that may be an impact now as a result next year is offset by that, but not completely offset. I think there still is. And based on our conversations with the finance committee, while some of this will impact next year's budget, that proverbial light is, far greater than any negative impact this has. Also, because as the mayor accurately said, we didn't have to make any draconian cuts, and we're not going into fund balance you don't see us, making a very simple solution of let's add a few $100,000 to the use of fund balance. That'll run us really low, or maybe we can get through it and cross our fingers. That would have been an easy way out, but we propose not to do that as a group and go with these three changes that I just outlined that were submitted to you in a memorandum last week, along with this draft copy of the budget. So with that, that pretty much sums it up. I know CFO Kolodje is here. I don't know if he has any comments, he can feel free, or if you have any questions for him or myself, or anybody on the finance committee, by all means.
Let's give Mr. Kolodje an opportunity, and then we'll open the floor to questions and discussion. Mr. Kolodje?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a little deeper into the weeds on what Mr. Jimes had presented to us. We have been actively working with Mr. Sarinelli, who is our budget consultant, and we have had discussions with the state in order to defend our budget as it stands now. We have successfully defended the use of 3-year averages for 5 of our revenue lines. We've successfully defended our pilot revenue, our grants. We provided explanations that satisfied the state regarding salary and wages for the fire department, the DPW, and community development as well. And we also submitted and successfully defended the revenue numbers that we used for our pool utility. So those are all the good news things. The only outstanding item that makes me nervous still is that the state wants to see our shared service agreements that we have in place for the shared court and for the inspections that we do for Milburn. I would suspect that there's a good chance, similar to our fears that we had about the insurance revenue being rejected, that the state may come back and require us to amend the budget further. I'm, and you know me, I'm a doom and gloom guy. So to me, I think that's what's coming from the state over the next couple of days. But obviously, we will work with Mr. Sarinelli and do our best to defend what we have in place.
Can you clarify what that would mean and why that would be something that's doom and gloom and that you're worried about?
So they're basically, the state is basically sniffing around over the amount of anticipated revenue that we have coming from the court and coming from both electrical and plumbing inspections for Milburn. And the only reason that they would wind up questioning that is that they think that the numbers that we have or are using are inflated. And if they decide that based on looking at the shared service agreements that they are indeed overstated, they will require us to reduce the amount of money that we're looking for revenue from these shared services. If that happens, that then leaves us with a revenue hole that will really only be able to be addressed through, well, I suppose we can take the easy way out and just tip the money for the balance. But it would somewhat affect, from a tax rate perspective, it's not going to affect. This budget is essentially maxing out our ability to put a levy in place. This budget, unlike the introduced budget that we and the subsequent amended budget that Nisavachi and I were working on, this is going to have no levy cap. Prior versions of this had us at somewhere around $150,000, $170,000 going into the cap. And if that was the case, we obviously could have moved the tax levy in order to plug up any revenue holes that were created by the state. But now that we're at zero with the levy bank, the only places we're going to be able to get it is either through fund balance, through the increase of ARP money, or through the decrease of expenditures in order to offset that revenue shortage. What makes me nervous is, like I said, the state's asking for this stuff, and in the past, they've never asked for this stuff. So something must be questionable to them based on what we've submitted at this point. But again, Mr. Sarinelli and I will do our best to defend what we put into place.
One bright note on the point that Mr. Kolodje just made, I did speak with our consultant later in the day today to kind of go over how likely he thought it would be if they could get over those numbers, or have a chance to go over those numbers sometime tomorrow morning, how likely he thought it would be that they would require a change to the proposed amendment, or if they're simply doing it as verification. And he seems hopeful that once we submit it, everything should check out and we ideally will not need to amend. So as Joe said, he's preparing in case the worst comes to fruition, but based off of the advice I received just a couple hours ago, it seems that that hopefully will not be the case.
Good to know. Thank you, Ms. Burnett. Other questions or remarks from my colleagues? Mr. McGehee, any remarks?
No, Mayor, I'm okay. Thank you so much.
Mr. DeLuca? Deputy Mayor DeLuca, excuse me.
No remarks.
Committee Member Cright.
No, no remarks.
I just want to clarify the comments that both you, Mayor, and Mr. Jimes said before with regard to the tax rate. We want to make sure that the public understands that we're talking about, there's no change in the tax rate from the budget we planned on passing. Because it kind of came off a little like no change in the tax rate at all, and that's unfortunately not the case. So I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Nope, yep, absolutely. I think what I said was there was no change. It's possible I may have not said it as well as I could. It's way past midnight here where I am right now.
Yeah,
Well,
no.
But I think I said that there was no change in the tax rate since what we had done in budget workshops for the 2022 budget. So we're still at 5.4 as we were before. So I'm making that clear, and thanks for that. Important to make it clear. Okay, so seeing no further discussion among TC members, any further comments or remarks from Mr. Jimes, Ms. Barnett, or Mr. Kolodziej before we open it up to public discussion for members of the public? Okay, seeing none. Do we have any members of the public who wish to be heard?
3 members of the public, and it doesn't appear that anyone is raising their hand at the moment.
Yep, that's what I'm seeing on my end too. I wanted to just make sure. Okay, so before we move to adjourn and then meet again tomorrow night, I'm wondering if there's an agreement with the proposed amendments as we just discussed them. Is there any way that we can just vote on this tonight and not have to meet again tomorrow, or is that no longer compliant and not possible?
I think tomorrow was advertised. Was it advertised as a public hearing, Ms. Clerk?
It's advertised as a public hearing, but
Correct.
it was just going to be for us to vote. We're presenting the same thing tonight in greater detail, frankly, and making public discussion available. So I'm wondering if we could vote on it tonight, and that would be our vote.
Here's what I would respectfully submit to the Township Committee. If you're so inclined to take a vote on it based on the draft resolution that you had, I think you can make a motion in a second to do so. CFO Joe and I will consult tomorrow, with our budget people just to make sure that that's fine. And if that's fine, then there's no reason to come back tomorrow. If there is, we'll obviously let you know.
Okay. Okay. So you know what? And let's just be conservative then. We made the time to meet again tomorrow, and in light of some of the things that came up tonight, for Mr. Kolodziej, Ms. Barnett followed up on those remarks. Let's just wait until we hear from the state on that other item, and until we have final approval before we officially vote on the amendment. Is everyone okay with that? Okay.
Will we be hearing from the state within the next 24 hours, or would this be something that?
I think that was the intention. What do we know, Township Administration and CFO Joe, what do we know?
It was my understanding, and both my other colleagues here can correct me if I'm wrong, that, we should have something available, once we submit those final shared service agreements tomorrow. We should have something available by the end of business day, but, I don't want to, I feel that's what I've been led to believe. So.
Yeah, we've been in fairly close contact with them. They're getting back to us within an hour or two once we submit items, and they're basically giving either full feedback of what is needed differently or whether something's good to go as we submit. So once those are in, we should hear back, as Mr. James said, within the business day.
Okay, well then we will keep the plan that we have. We'll meet again tomorrow night. Should be a quick meeting unless something comes up tomorrow during the day. Let us know. Otherwise, we will be back here tomorrow night at 7 p.m. like this in another special meeting.
I
Hopefully,
move we adjourn.
Second.
Second.
good night, everybody.
Adams.
Yes.
Ms. Wright,
Yes.
Mr. DeLuca,
Yes.
Mr. McGee,
Yes.
Mayor Daffis.
Yes.
To
Thank
adjourn.